everyone, and welcome to another Scots Fahey podcast. And today I'm joined by writer and musician, which is key, Carrie Marshall, to talk about her new book, Smalltown Joy, which is coming out with 404 Inc. Hello, Carrie.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really well. I'm really well. And just before we get into the book, when is it coming out? When can people buy it?
It's coming out at the end of April. Pre-orders from the website are going out now, but I think bookshops are going to have to wait until the 24th.
Fantastic. And I have to say before we begin, I really enjoyed this book. I'm a big, as you
Oh,
know, a big
great.
music fan, and there was so much to kind of get your teeth into. It was lovely. It's got a subtitle to it. So can you explain that? Because that kind of gives a picture of what the book is.
Sure. It's about how queer music changed the sound of Scotland. And what I mean by that is it's not just a book about queer musicians, it's a book about all musicians and the musical conversation that happens when people do interesting things in music and then other people hear it. So, for example, there's probably not an obvious influence of gay disco on Biffy Clyro, but there is a connection there.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of stuff that I wanted to really get into, and that was the sort of stuff that I found really delightful and surprising. And I wanted to basically write a book about that and about how all these things connect and how it drives the cultural conversation forward.
And there are lots of interesting connections, almost like a rock family tree that go down. This person influenced that
Yeah,
person and take you in unexpected, journeys as well, I think.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And why did you want to write this book? What was the kind of driving force behind it?
I had a couple of reasons for it. I was coming out of putting out a memoir, Carrie Kills a Man, about being trans. And it was very apparent when I was promoting that book that there were very dark clouds coming for the LGBTQ plus community, both here and internationally. And I felt that I wanted to write something joyful. Because I'd originally thought about writing more about trans rights and things like that, but I felt that I didn't want to spend 2 to 3 years getting bogged down in that when there was so much more joyful things to be covering. And from my own perspective, I've been in music for a long time now, and I've been in it, in two different time periods. I played in bands in the 90s, and I play equally unsuccessfully now. I'm a music fan and a musician, and I've been in two genders because I was previously, presenting male, presenting female, and things have changed quite a lot in that time. And I wanted to get stuck into that and find out, are things as different as they appear to me now? And what's it like being a queer musician in Scotland today?
And the book opens with a quote from Edwin Morgan, which
Yeah.
struck me partly because it's the second book I've read this month, which has an opening quote from
Oh,
Edwin
brilliant.
Morgan. Andreas N. Orderica's poetry collection, Holy Boys, also has one as well. I was wondering why did you have an Edwin Morgan quote?
I came to him. I'm wearing my Idlewild t-shirt today. I learned about Edwin Morgan not at school, but through Idlewild because they featured him on Scottish Fiction and Remote Part, which is one of my very favorite pieces of music by anybody. And I just thought it was he had a lot in common with some of the musicians that I've been writing about, as you know, as a gay man in Scotland, when Scotland was not a particularly tolerant place for gay people. Um, but I love that particular poem because he talks about all the different facets of love that, love marches, love is this powerful thing that sends a probe way beyond. And that really resonated with me. I think it's a beautiful piece of writing as well.
It really is. And here's a poet whose, reach just a it's non-stop, Scottish Macar influence felt way beyond Scotland as well.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
The title plays on Bronski Beat's Small Town Boy,
Yes.
which, well, let's talk a bit about that because I also think it's an incredibly important song.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you? And we should say it reappears throughout the book as well.
It does. Jimmy Somerville is something of a recurring character in the book, and the more I've learned about him, just the more impressed I am by him. Um, from a musical point of view, I think Bronski Beat came up with something that, it's like if you listen to like Heartbreak Hotel or songs like that, they're of their time, but they're timeless
Mm.
as well, and they still sound strange. And I think Small Town Boy still stands up today as just a genuinely beautiful piece of pop music. I love the way that it's been put together. I love the space of it. And Jimmy's voice is just the most exceptional thing. And I write in the book that it's defeated many a person at karaoke because you think you can do that note, you try and do that note, you cannot do that note, because he's a countertenor. It's not a falsetto that he's doing, and that's a very, very rare vocal for male people. And so from a performance point of view, it's truly exceptional. But then you had the video as
Yeah.
well. And this is 1984, so the vast majority of gay artists are in stealth. This is the point, like Freddie Mercury wasn't talking about it, George Michael wasn't talking about it. And the other artists that you had were very sort of high camp. You had sort of like the Boy Georges and people like that as well. And then you've got these like just three wee guys from Rock Hill in a video about homophobic violence and parental rejection. And to see that on TV in 1984 was astonishing. And it's something that comes up again and again and again with the interviews that I've done in the book, where it's people talking about feeling connected, feeling seen, feeling represented by queer artists, by queer music. Um, and I think that, it's absolutely seismic because like my own experience of being a trans person, I didn't see people like me
Mhm.
on television or in the culture. I saw a very narrow stereotype of trans women, but I didn't see, people like me who tend to bomb about in plaid shirts and listen to heavy metal and things like that. Um, and that effect, there's a really interesting feature in the Somewhere for Us magazine where just lots of people were talking about their feelings about Small Town Boy. And again and again and again, it's like I saw myself
Mhm.
for the first time. And it's not necessarily a happy record, it's a very powerful and sad record. But to have that recognition that it's not just you, that other people are experiencing what you're feeling and that you're not broken. That came up in the music, and among the musicians as well, because they found that making music was a way for them to express who they were and how they felt, which is powerful magic, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, I mean, I think, I'm not saying you had to be there to understand the context, but to have this little guy, because, as we know, Jimmy's a small fella with this huge voice,
Yeah.
leaving Glasgow on the train. I mean, it's in, the story of the video is in the song as well,
Yes.
and going and leaving. It was incredibly powerful and arguably the most important single of the 80s, certainly British single, I think, of the 80s. And I did not know that Steve Bronski was from Castlemilk. That was
Oh, right.
there's
Yeah.
lots of lovely little nuggets, like the kind of thing I kind of soak up throughout the band. But to think of Bronski Beat, as you say, three guys making this incredible music and at the heart of this incredible singer as well. And you touch on, and I'd forgotten they'd covered Sylvester, but there was someone else with a similar voice. That
Yeah.
power of the falsetto. You said it's not falsetto, the kind of, what
Oh,
did you say?
Sylvester was a falsetto, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. But that voice to the lay person like me sounds, there's a real power to it. And
Yeah.
again, a kind of joy, even though Jimmy's was maybe, there was a melancholy there as well, due to the song, due to the story, when he then goes on to cover Sylvester later on. And a lot of the other music that Jimmy Somerville made, there is that joy, isn't there?
Oh, it's absolutely joyful. And it's something I became a bit obsessed about during the writing of the book because, I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, and it was very, very drummed into that, for example, disco was not serious music. But when you actually look at the stories of the people that were making it, this is protest music. These are protest songs in many cases. And the fact that these people are going out and having a good time and looking fantastic and being unapologetically queer was seriously political. And, I didn't know that because I was just a wee boy at Beath Primary School, and my friends were telling me the disco was rubbish. But it's really given me an appreciation for an awful lot of music that I had previously rejected as being not worthy compared to, skinny white boys with guitars. And so that was hugely entertaining.
And it's interesting there because I think you return throughout the book to people who are involved with dance music and
Yes.
electronic music more recently, perhaps. And that seemed to be a kind of safe space for a lot of musicians to make their music.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And I think it was much more of a melting pot of all kinds of people. And in the interview I did with Keith from Optimo, he was talking about that and how the clubbing scene really brought down barriers. And you had, the indie kids and the dance kids, and you had people of all genders and people of all races. And he made a really interesting point as well that Scottish music is different. Electronic music was different from English electronic music because we weren't quite so racially mixed. So you
Yeah.
had like a lot of the soul music and a lot of the Jamaican dub that was so big a deal in London wasn't quite as important up here. So we had a slightly different musical character. And I think you can really hear the difference in a lot of the post-punk, for example, that we produced.
Yeah, and also because I was going out to clubs in the late 80s and early 90s, a lot of the ones that you talk about in the book, a lot of the influences actually came over from America, the
Yes.
Chicago house sound, the Derek Marshall, and all of those things, particularly into places like the Sub Club. So you were getting a sound that was slightly different, I think, from other
Yeah.
places. I was that because I know you as we mentioned a rock guitarist, musician. Was that interesting to go into these worlds that perhaps you didn't know as much about?
Yeah, and it's something I've been quite honest about in the book. There's various genres that I didn't know about, and I just sort of stumbled in with preconceived ideas. And a great example of that is the Scottish folk music scene, which I don't know a lot about, but I assumed that because it's traditional music, it's going to be very small C conservative. And then I went to these events where it's very, very inclusive, it's very, very diverse, it's very young, and it's very exciting. So that was great. That was a real eye opener. Um, and I think one of the things I really liked is just how things connect and bounced backwards and forwards across the Atlantic. And I think Glasgow being such an important place for shipbuilding
Yeah.
and for the exodus of Scots to America as well. I think that's had a huge effect. So you've got our music goes across and mixes with all these other cultures in America to create country music, which then comes back here, and then we twist that into new shapes. And it's almost like a game of tennis almost, where these ideas are bouncing forwards and backwards. Um, and I love the idea that like Johnny Cash could have been the man in Black Watch because his family he believed was from Fife. This kind of stuff. But you can hear the connections. There was a there's an American cultural critic who suggests that the lining out style of Hebridean singing has had an influence on the sound of black spirituals in America, because these people were there at the time that people were keeping slaves, and there are some dark bits in that history very clearly, but from a musical point of view, you can see where the cross pollination is happening, and that's endlessly fascinating, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And there's been quite a lot done. I went to a theatre piece a couple of years ago, which was looking exactly at that, where
Mm.
Scottish music had taken influence from and then influenced further. And it was
Yes,
often to do with the movement of people, sometimes the forced movement of people
yes, yeah, very much so.
into these places. And in your introduction, you do give a good kind of cultural and historical overview of what's to come next. You then go on to kind of concentrate on Scotland. But there's, you talk about how rock and roll was influenced. You talk about the influence of some people I knew, some people I didn't. Little Richard, one I knew, and the kind of influence that was taken on. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you discovered researching the wider context?
Yeah, the wider context of it was really interesting because you have certain people that are canon in this. So you can't really go wrong if you say Bowie, Buzzcocks, and Chic, and having a massive influence on everybody that came after them. Um, People like Little Richard were a huge influence on pretty much any musician of the 1960s and 70s. But he in turn was, I wouldn't say that he ripped off, but he took a lot of inspiration from a performer called Escarita,
Mm.
who was coming out of the kind of the big tent shows, and it was very very, very, very queer, very stylized, and passed all that sort of stuff on. And so that whole showmanship of early rock and roll came from there. And Sister Rosetta Tharpe comes up a lot in all the histories of rock, which is great because she wasn't getting her due for a very, very long time. But to see her, you can see where Chuck Berry
Yeah.
it's got his ideas from. And you can see this whole, and music is an ongoing thing of people copying everybody else. That's what makes it so vibrant. As soon as somebody has one good idea, everybody else goes, oh yeah, let's do that, and let's see where we can push that further. So that was really, really interesting. And I think one of the reasons that we maybe don't know as much about the queer history of music is because for such a long time, queer people have not been welcomed by
Mm.
the wider society. So John Savage's book, The Secret Public, is just a masterpiece for that. It's just such an astonishing work. And Daryl Bullock's books about the 70s and 80s in music have been really, really good as well. About sort of not so much unearthing the history of it, but just giving people credit where credit is due. Because they've been left out. And much the way that black musicians were left out of the story of rock and roll for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
I think we're having a similar processes happening with queer musicians now. And one of my favorite examples of that is like Wendy Carlos. There's a line between Wendy Carlos with Switched on Bach and Churches Today that goes through John Carpenter, who was hugely influenced by Wendy Carlos, and then Churches has been massively influenced by John Carpenter, and openly so.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
huge. And that kind of reconnection, it fascinates me. I love to go from there to there to there. It's like, how do you get from Finney Tribe to Ministry, for example,
Yeah.
and industrial music and Nine Inch Nails? It's like it's all bouncing about. It's great.
It was only fairly recently that I realised that Chris Connolly from Finney Tribe was Chris Connolly from Ministry. I had
Yeah,
never,
no,
never
I didn't
put
pick up
them
on that
together
either.
as one
Yeah,
person. I went, oh my goodness, how have they gone from that to that? And that's what I really loved about reading your book, is that there's bits of the story I knew, but then you connected them with the people I didn't know, and
right.
the some of the books. I mean, it's a great one for going, I must make a note of that book. I must make a note of that book. So, and making the picture more complete, I guess, of the story. As you say, there are people who are canon, who everyone will know. But what makes it really interesting is Escorita was a great example I had never heard of. So, and that kind of goes on throughout. Were you ever tempted to keep it to that scale? I mean, you would have been writing it for years, I'm sure.
It
But
would
would
be
you
years of
always
work.
want to kind of focus down onto Scotland eventually?
I wanted to focus. I wanted to focus on Scotland and primarily on mainstream music because those are things I know about.
Yeah.
So for example, there's like really exciting stuff happening in the queer clubbing scene, but I'm a 52-year-old middle class Taylor Swift fan. I'm not the person to tell that story. I would love to read that story, but I'm
Yeah.
not the person to tell it. Um, I think I think what I wanted to do was to tell one story,
Yeah.
and I think I'd widened it too much, I think that would have sent me off. I mean, like for example, my editor Kirsten, who's brilliant, but she's had to say on a few occasions, it's like that's very good, but this is no connection to the story that you're telling here. So like I went off for an entire chapter on Joe Meek and his story, but it wasn't really relevant because his production stuff was relevant, but his life story was not part of the main narrative. So I have to watch my tendency to go off on wild tangents because I do a lot.
Um,
Um,
Having worked as an editor myself in the past and worked on particularly historical novels where writers have done all this research and they just want that research to be in the book. Say, well, see
yeah.
this chapter on the flying hawks in Afghanistan in the 17th century? It's really interesting. It adds nothing to what's going on. Was those the kind of conversations you were having?
I think yeah, I think there's room for that level of detail. So, for example, Grant McPhee's books
Yeah,
are hugely detailed and seem to interview everybody who's ever been in those music scenes, and that's really, really good. Um, that's not the kind of storyteller that I am, though.
yeah.
I'm the person that's sitting next to you in the pub and saying, "Did you know about this?" And I get really excited. I want to then, share that. Um, and so I think I think my book is part of a wider conversation with lots and lots and lots of other authors. Carla Easton did that wonderful Since Yesterday film about the Scottish girl groups.
Yeah.
Um, Graham Thompson stuff about bands like Simple Minds is just spectacular. So this is me just sort of coming in with some fascinating facts, I guess.
There's lots of fascinating facts. One I particularly liked, if I can find it, I've written it down here, was that Richie Blackmore played on Just Like Eddie. And as
Yeah,
someone who used to love his kind of Rainbow and Purple when I was younger, I was a kind of young heavy metal fan. I was like, really, Richie Blackmore?
that whole era, just everybody was involved in everything by everybody, which is really fascinating because they were all just working it out as they went along. And yeah, that whole era is just absolutely fascinating to me.
And of course, there would be just a tiny percentage of the musicians that are around now. back then. So it makes sense that they would all kind of, all right, Jeff
Yeah,
Beck, you want to jump onto this and things like that.
yeah. I mean, there were so many barriers to having any sort of career in music that we don't have now. You know, anybody can go and get a laptop or even an iPhone and start making music. So yeah, it was a much smaller thing, and we didn't have the industry that we had. You know, when you've got the Beatles coming up to be the backing bands, going through all the wee Scottish towns and stuff. That's where the work was. It's changed so much
Yeah.
in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned a few of them, but there are these certain characters who seem key to the story. Do you have any favorites that you could maybe expand on?
I think, well, Jimmy Somerville is definitely. I just love the fact that um, you keep having these things, and then Jimmy Somerville pops up and just cuts through the crap straight away. So there's a good example of that of during the AIDS epidemic, where people were doing like kind of things for charity, but it was all very euphemistic, and you know, it's a very almost like American showbiz kind of approach to charity records. And Jimmy Somerville was like, no, we need money, we need to treat people. You know, this is what is needed. And he's still doing that today. He stood up fairly recently for trans people when an anti-trans organization was using his music, and he was like, no, you cannot do that. This is not for you. So I
Yeah,
think that's great.
yeah,
I think, and I mean, I loved every musician that I interviewed because these are people talking about what they're passionate about, and it's what I'm passionate about as well. So it's just an opportunity to sit and geek out about music for
yeah,
ages.
yeah,
Um, Shirley Manson was exactly what you would expect from Shirley Manson. Just a teenage me would have exploded at the prospect of talking to Shirley. But I think um, while the musicians were all really fascinating, the people that I was really interested by were people like Steg and Delana from Sunny Govan Radio, EJ from Queen Sounds, the people at Music Broth, all these different organizations who are trying to elevate marginalized people in music in all kinds of different ways. Um, because these are people that are putting in a lot of work. Whereas, you know, when you're a musician, you just sort of bounce about making your wee tunes and stuff. But these are people that are trying to actually shift the power.
yeah,
They're trying to create opportunities for people. They're trying to address the inequalities that happen, and I think that's really powerful stuff. So, for example, you know, there's a whole couple of chapters where I spent some time with Sunny Govan Radio
yeah,
because I'm trying to find out where the gay Scottish rappers are, and that was just so interesting and inspiring to me because we were talking about, you know, the economic realities of Glasgow in particular and the things that are preventing people from maybe coming forward and the cultural forces around rap music specifically. I loved that. That was absolutely just like really inspiring. I came away from that just absolutely full of faith in humanity again. Which didn't last long because Donald Trump was elected shortly afterwards, but
yeah.
you take what
But
you can get.
a chat with Steg G makes the world seem a better place.
Absolutely. The two of them are just so passionate about people, you know, and that's the thing that they believe in people, and that's just stunning, just wonderful.
And did you have preconceptions about Scottish hip hop before you spoke to them?
Yes. Yeah, I've been to a few hip hop things, and again, you know, middle age and middle class. It's not music made for people like me. Um, and the gigs that I had seen were almost like a parody, I think, of American rap culture. I didn't think it felt. Choose my words carefully because I don't want to slag anybody off it, and
No,
I'm
sure.
not. It's not slagging. It just felt that it was it was very like somebody who had sort of only heard about hip hop from watching a couple of videos on MTV and then trying to do it. So it felt very male. It felt very aggressive. And then I started discovering, you know, the artists that we've got. Like we've got people like Sweet Rogue, who is a grime artist, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to get Sweet Rogue to come and talk to me. We tried for the best part of a year and just kept losing force. But you know, this really aggressive, strong character who's got a really interesting backstory as well. Because they, you know, Sweet Rogue got into rapping after being like really scared of going outside, and to go from that and be part.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of issues about being a woman in the grime community and to be a gay woman as well in the grime community is a whole other world of stuff. So that kind of thing's really fascinating. And I found that I think the community is much more inclusive than I expected it to be. Because you know that I think of all genres have had their problems
Mm,
with homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, all that kind of stuff. But I always felt that hip hop was such an aggressively masculine genre. And as I write about in the book, it took quite a long time for any sort of high profile figures in the community to come out.
mhm,
And it tended to be the women that came out first, and even then, that was after they had reached superstar status.
mhm.
Um, so it's been really interesting to see how much that's changing. And it definitely is changing, but I think it's going to take a while before it quite catches up here because we are to an extent following America's lead in hip hop because that's the driving force of hip hop culture.
And it's interesting you talk about Shirley Manson. Just this morning, I've read an interview in The Guardian, quite an extensive interview in The Guardian with Shirley Manson. And it was interesting to do that after just having read your book. And one of the points she makes is that often female fronted bands, that's how they're defined.
Yes.
So and I think in the 90s, in Britpop in particular, there
Yeah.
was always the joke about Sleeper, where, the singer and three blokes or four blokes or whatever it might be, the sleeper blokes. And do you think that is something which pertains today? And is it the same with queer fronted bands?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, yeah, one of the things that has been an ongoing problem is that woman is not a genre of music. So just because a woman is playing a particular style of music doesn't mean you should lump her in with other women who are playing completely different styles of music. And I think there were some people that I wanted to speak to for the book that didn't want to be in the book because they didn't want to be seen as a queer person first and an
Yeah.
artist second, which I totally understand. I think um, I think what we're seeing now is just queer people just taking their place in all genres. I mean, there's some types of music where it's much more queer than others, I think. So, for example, industrial noise music just seems to be entirely trans women and allies at the moment. It's really strange. Um, but I think it's more about, and I think reflecting the wider society, which is just like, the understanding that queer people are no different from anybody else. So of course you're going to have queer folk musicians and queer rock stars and queer dance acts, this kind of stuff. Um, but I think that's a relatively recent development, and that there's definitely a generational shift as well. So if you look at the scenes that are primarily young people, it's very diverse. It's very
Mm.
um, inclusive. And as you start getting older and older and older, it starts becoming a bit more narrow.
Which is
Um,
the same in so many areas, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how did you choose who to interview, and how did you approach the interviews? Did you have a kind of set way of doing it, or did you just have a chat?
It was more of a chat. I knew that I wanted to speak to Shirley Manson because there's something to talk about in the book that one of Garbage's songs was really important to me in working out who I was. So the song Androgyny just blew my mind when I heard it and saw the video. And it's like, other people are talking about this, you know? And, I was a huge fan of Garbage at the time as well. Um, I I wanted to get quite a variety of people.
Mm,
So what I didn't want it to be was just all the usual suspects because there is a sort of royalty of Scots musicians.
yeah, sure.
And I didn't want to just do that. I wanted to talk to folk musicians. I wanted to talk to rappers. Um, so I think with each interview, I just sort of went into it on the basis of the person that I was talking to. So I'd gone to see Walt Disco when I was dealing with some grief, and it was this beautifully life-affirming thing. So I wanted to talk to Joss from Walt Disco about that power that music has, that and Joss is going through their own gender stuff, so that was quite a fascinating conversation to have. With Shirley Manson, that was it was much more interested in the dynamics of quite a long and very successful career and her experiences and her because Shirley has said that she if she were a teenager now, there's a high chance she would consider herself non-binary, so that was quite interesting to talk through all of that. And then you get to hang out with people like Hamish Hawk, who is a generation younger than me and
Mm,
has grown up with all this fantastic music and found a way that it was speaking to him. He's a great interviewee, by the way.
yeah.
Just You know, I could have got, 30 chapters
Yeah.
easily out of that conversation. Lovely
I,
guy.
I had him on the radio show. I think just when the first album had come out, and yeah, immediately you could tell this guy knows what he's talking about and knows how to say it as well.
Yeah, yeah. There's a bit when we were talking about what he does on stage, and he seems quite offended at the idea that anybody might think that he would do any move that he hadn't planned. It's like he really thinks about the whole pop star thing, and I love that.
Yeah.
Because it's such an interesting conversation to have with people because they have studied the art form so much. I kind of feel like I was going to see some sort of guru, which is great.
And someone else you speak to, I was really delighted that you did, because she's one of my favorite musicians, or they are, is Megan Black.
Yes, yeah, she's
It's
great.
absolutely brilliant. And again, the style and the energy and everything that is put out there on stage, is fantastic.
Yeah, she's very, very funny as well. And that self-aware thing. So she knows sometimes when she's coming right up to the edge of cliche and has fun with that. And I love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And also, there was Lauren Maybury's in the book as well from Churches. And my eldest is in Girls Rock Glasgow this
Mhm.
year. And it was really nice that after writing about Lauren, I saw through Girls Rock that she was doing a meet and greet with all of the kids from that. And this is
Wow.
something that a lot of these musicians are doing, that they're making a point of inviting along the next generation of young musicians, and particularly people from marginalized uh, groups, women and non-binary people, and just inspiring them and, giving back to that to try and encourage people to make their own music and get involved. And that's a fantastic thing.
And I was thinking away as well about the changes in how I listen to music, and I guess yourself, that's changed over the years too. Do you think that more? I guess it's almost more accessible these days. All music is more accessible these days. Do you think that's made a difference?
I think it has. There's a wonderful bit in my conversation with Keith from Optimal where he talks about buying records unheard, and it's like, who does that now? Like artists that you've genuinely never heard a note about, but you've read about them in the music press endlessly, and that gets you out to buy the records. And I did that as well. Um, I think I'm a technology journalist by day, so I've been covering digital music for as long as there has been digital music, and I think we have lost something from the move to streaming. And I think that what we've lost is attention. So, I would, I'm not particularly cool. So I was buying my U2 records as a teenager, and I would sit on the bus and I would go through all the sleeve notes on the bus home, getting really excited about listening to this. And I would get home, get the headphones on, get the vinyl on. And I was not leaving that album until I loved it. I would just play it again and again and again and again. Whereas now, half a second if the note doesn't grab me on streaming, and I'm moving on to something else. So I've got tons of vinyl here that I haven't got around to listening to, because I've been streaming, and I haven't forged that connection with the music that I stream that I forged with the music that I really tried to climb inside. And but then I think that might just be I'm too old to hack it with the technology, because my kids fall in love with music and
Yeah.
they're not listening to it on vinyl or taking records home on the bus. They're getting it from TikTok and Apple Music and things like that. So
And are still following it in a similar way, like listening to albums or so, or is it a different way
yeah,
of doing
yeah,
it?
no, it's an album thing, and my eldest is 17 and is into death metal, which is just terrible because I have to listen to it in the house. But there's such a word of mouth community in the Scottish metal scene. It's like everybody seems to know everybody else, and they're recommending bands. The bands are recommending other bands, and it's very, very close knit. And that's been really interesting to see as well, because that's clearly getting people out to shows and getting the word of mouth out.
I think that's really interesting in a positive way, and I think your book reflects that too. Is that it used to be that the tribes were kind of separate. I knew friends that were into metal and would go to the Cat House and would go to Solid Rock Cafe,
Yeah,
and they wouldn't go anywhere else. I also had friends who would be into their indie music and they'd be down Fury Murray's and all whatever that would be. And yes, there was some crossover, particularly
yeah.
with dance music and stuff in the 90s, the late 80s, early 90s. But folk musicians. You might never kind of meet a folk musician or a jazz musician. These days, everyone seems to be collaborating with other people and taking on that. And the range of your interviews in the book kind of show that as well, I think.
Yeah, I think it's quite. Um, there has been quite a sea change because I think barriers get broken down a lot, and I mean a good example of that is I don't get jazz music.
Mhm.
You know, like I can appreciate why it's good, but I was never introduced to it. I never immersed in it, so it's a different language that I don't speak. Whereas the music that my kids play is every genre imaginable. It really is. So like, I was talking about Sophie, and my youngest, who's 11, starts going the Lemonade song and starts singing it, and then my eldest chimes in, my death metal eldest, and the two of them are singing Sophie. It's like, where did you get that? And it's because that snobbery between genres doesn't seem to be there in the way that it was. And maybe that's because we don't have a significant music press anymore, because that used to pit tribe against tribe to an
Yeah.
extent. So you would have, you know, like particularly the enemy was very much against rap music other than Public Enemy, and you had some pretty nasty stuff in Melody Maker against UK Garage, and you know, and that has kind of gone, I think. Um,
But also, I think you've got a generation of musicians who, now some of them will go to the conservatoire or something and meet others there,
yes,
but others who will just go to shows and go to completely different shows. I think Scottish hip hop's a great example because there was always a Scottish hip hop scene, even in the 80s and, well, particularly in the 90s. But I never heard any of it because it was kind of being made in people's bedrooms and being shared around places
yes.
that I didn't know that the people that were involved. But now, you know, it's on television, it's winning awards, you know, it's kind of come much more into the mainstream.
And you know, we talk about some of the things that help with that, like the Scottish Music Awards, and think amplifying things like that that are trying to raise the awareness of all this kind of stuff, and that's all very positive too. Um, I mean, on a more negative side, I think we've lost a lot of the structures that used to help bands and
Mm.
solo musicians get established. So there's effectively no local press coverage, there's effectively no music press. And I think as well, there's a with what we're seeing in music as a business is the same sort of hollowing out that we've seen in other industries where the money flows to the top. So in music, the move to streaming, people aren't really buying records anymore.
Mm.
So there's very little money coming in from streaming services to artists. And so you're in this ridiculous situation where like the boss of Spotify is worth more than Paul McCartney, whereas the artists that he's streaming in many cases are not getting paid at all.
Yeah.
You know, that's having a disastrous effect on the middle of music. So we've still got grassroots venues, but that sort of midsection where artists can make a living from a, you know, like the kind of C86 kind of bands,
Yeah.
that sort of level of success. I'm not sure that that's possible anymore. And I think now so many musicians have got to have a day job and can't
Yeah.
then afford to even do a fairly modest tour because the economics don't work anymore. And I think that's a real shame because, you know, you go back to the early days of like Goodbye, Mr. Mackenzie, for example, and that was, you know, YTS record label.
Mm.
You know, that was government money that was okay. It was not what the government intended it to be used for, but we had a whole generation of record labels came out of basically the benefit system because people could afford to devote the time to music that they needed to devote.
I'm
Whereas now you've got, you know, all these jobs and then you've got to try and fit it in this tiny amount of time.
you know, a label and a band that we still revere to this day in Postcard Records and Orange Juice. That was exactly how they managed to kind of go through. And there is this odd thing at the moment where there's, in my experience, there's more great music being released perhaps than ever before in Scotland, but yet there's less places for that to be covered and discovered, I think, which is a real shame. Did you have fun? I get the feeling you had good fun writing this book. It comes through on the page.
I had enormous fun. I think I don't think I don't think you can write about music that you love without it being an absolute blast. Um, and there's a line that I use in the book. I'm talking about when I'm interviewing Hamish Hawke. I talk about I think the most interesting musicians are the most interested.
Yeah, that
Is
jumped
right.
out to me. Yeah.
So these are people that are always receiving, that they're always really curious about the world around them. So, to spend any time in their company is it's a real education from really interesting, charismatic people. So yeah, it was just such fun to the point that I've bored all my friends stupid in the pub, like literally after every interview. It's like, and then they said this, and then they said that, and then wait till you hear this thing. It's like, oh, for God's sake, here we go. But yeah, an absolute hit.
But that did strike me because I was thinking back to when I see falling in love with albums, and I started reading Norman Mailer because I'd heard Lloyd Cole singing about it.
Yes,
And
yes.
a lots of things like reading the music press, and you would get interviews. You mentioned Morrissey in the book, but he was always good for a film that you would have taken the cover of a Smiths album from or something like that. So the kind of wider cultural education was just fantastic.
It really was. The Manic Street Preachers were probably the
Yeah.
best example of that. You couldn't get through an interview with them without having to go to the library afterwards. Um, but I like that, and I think as well that's one of the reasons that all these boundaries do come crashing down because these people are open to all music as well. They're not just interested in this very now. I mean, like Shirley Manson, one of her earliest bands was the Stray Cats, and I would never have believed that listening to any of the music that she's made.
Yeah.
I cannot hear a Brian Setzer guitar riff in anything that Garbage does. Um, but that's the joy of it because
Yeah.
all of this stuff comes in and then it swirls about in their brains, and then something magical comes out. And yeah, that's just the best thing.
I
And
remember
almost everything.
sorry,
Good.
I was going to say, I remember talking to, I can't remember the name now, but whose early influences included Aha, and it was kind of quite a punk, loud sound. And you go, oh, really? But of course, all musicians, we don't all start off with a perfect kind of, taste, musical taste. If you're interested in it, you'll go all sorts of places to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I talk about Bob Mould in the book, and
Yeah,
one of the reasons that Bob Mould and Husker Du are so influential is because they didn't take that scorched earth thing that the other hardcore bands did, which is there is one type of music and that is the only music that we care about. They were drawn from like 1960s lush guitar pop, and then playing it on chainsaws, which is the magic of what Husker Du did. But they weren't that narrow-minded. They were very much, let's just see what we can take from what, and we can build things with this. Um, and that's where the music evolves, and that's where the influence comes from. And then people then take that and they do their own thing with it, and it moves on again. So like I love the fact that um, like pretty much all pop music now is the sound traceable back to Glasgow's dad's playing the rave tapes in the car on the school run, because that's what inspired Sophie, who had such a seismic effect on. And I love that. Somebody's dad in a Ford Sierra playing the rave tapes, just brilliant, absolutely
and
brilliant.
going back again to links between disco and nearly everything else, I'm sure I started listening to the music of Chic because Johnny Marr had spoken about how much
Yes,
he loved them as a band.
Dave
And of
Grohl
course,
from Nirvana is
yeah,
very into disco drummers. Um,
absolutely.
and once you start listening for it, you can hear it. It's not obvious at first, but it's like, oh, right, okay, yeah, you can hear the Earth, Wind, and Fire influence going on there. It's really, really cool.
No, absolutely. And you talk about rave dads in the car. There's a section, or at least a bit, on how popular male stripper it was in
Yes.
Scotland, which was, and I remember it well, of course, but it seemed to have this real hold in Scotland.
I really thought that Keith McKayler was doing a wind up when he said it was the best-selling 12-inch in Scotland, but I don't think he was winding me up. Um, and it, it makes sense because it really was everywhere.
Yeah,
Um, and I can hear it in so much more recent stuff, because it's almost got that almost got the European motoric kind of drive to it as well. So yeah, it's an astonishing bit of music, and particularly at the time when I was living down in Beath in Ayrshire,
right.
and we were not particularly into dance music down there, but this was just universal. Like you would go to the petrol station and the guy was playing it there, and it would be playing in the pub at the weekend, and just an astonishing achievement for such a strange record.
Yeah. It was,
It's a strange record.
Radio Clyde in all the clubs, and but yeah, that was a really interesting section. And there's also this thing which I have read elsewhere about how Scottish dance music, the beats per minute were higher and harder, and all sorts of things going on.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
we liked our music a lot faster. It slowed down as you went down south,
yeah,
and drugs were a huge
yeah.
factor in all of this as well. And you know, talking to people that maybe didn't partake themselves, but there was a definite change from like speed-fueled punk to what was going on when ecstasy arrived in the clubs. And I mean that's a fascinating story in its own right.
Yeah.
And often like there's a lot of tall tales told about it as well. So like the arrival of ecstasy has been credited to all kinds of different people, but there's no doubt about the effect that it had,
Mhm.
and the really positive effect that it had on music, I think.
Yeah, and the places where music was played and listened to and danced to as well. And you mentioned earlier on that chapters even had to kind of be edited and left out because they didn't fit. Does that mean that you'd like to continue in writing, maybe if not about this exactly, about music and in this way?
I think so because I mean music has always been like the most important part of culture for me. And in my own case, writing this book, I it's not quite the book I set out to write because I lost my mum when I was writing it, and the the power that music had during that period was incredible. There's so much in terms of just getting me out of a place of grief and going to places and seeing bands live and just having that emotional release, that catharsis. So yeah, I think that's always going to be very important. It's finding what story that I want to tell because I was quite sure with this book that I wanted to talk about the wider things that were going on around the music. I didn't want it just to be a list of songs by queer people or songs that were influential. So I wanted to talk about, you know, the the music that was in the clubs, but at the same time we were starting to get the beginnings of the AIDS crisis
Mhm.
from the drugs that were coming in. And what the attitudes were around like in the 1970s when we didn't have any openly gay musicians because it was social death.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know what to do next. Um, 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 yeah, it, it's finding what story that I want to tell. I
Yeah.
think that's the thing for me. I need to know what my chat's going to be
Mhm.
to do it, and so I don't know. I don't know what's next.
And now that the book's finished and it's out there and you reflect on it, have you learned anything from it? Do you think you've kind of, whether that be about music or it be about anything more widely?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about music that I wasn't very knowledgeable about. I've learned quite a lot about Scotland
Yeah,
as well because researching emigration and immigration, the political things that were going on, what our reactions were to things like AIDS, um, drug policy, all this kind of stuff. So it's all been really, really interesting. And um, I've been reading an awful lot of histories of Britain,
hmm,
and it's interesting in so many ways Scotland does things differently and has long done things differently, and not necessarily always in a positive way. So, for
yeah,
example, it took us much longer to decriminalize homosexuality than England did. Um, but yeah, it's that's been fascinating because most of our media is coming from London and focuses very much on that. So, and most of what we learn in schools is again,
yeah,
well, was I don't know what it's like now because obviously I'm in my 50s, but um, so that was really eye-opening to delve into the history and also like recent history, like the deprivation in Govan compared to across the water in Partick.
yeah.
These are real issues that are affecting people now. So yeah, that I learned a lot about that.
And as you said earlier on, particularly in music and the arts, things are changing quickly and moving on, and
Very,
new
very
people
quickly.
come up and all of those things. Carrie, absolutely loved the book for all the reasons that we've spoken about, but I think particularly the amount of interviews and the kind of diversity of the interviews means you're getting individual stories rather than generic assumptions, and I think that's hugely important.
Thank you.
And the book is called Smalltown Joy. It's out with 404 Inc. I should say, and we should say, there's a Spotify playlist as well, isn't there?
There is. There's one on Spotify and there's one on Apple Music. So if you come along to my website, which is carriem.co.uk, and on the page for Small Town Joy, there are links because it's, these horrific web addresses that
Yeah.
I can't read out. But yeah, and I, because what I want people to do is to go and listen to music. That's the whole point of the book. I want people to go and hopefully encounter things that they haven't heard before, or maybe hear things that they thought they knew, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so the playlists are a really important part of that.
And there's some of the music we spoke about, but there's so much more that we haven't mentioned as well. I
Yeah,
think the
it turns out
perfect
it's
way to
hours
do
long.
it, it really is. So I think the perfect thing to do is to read the book with the soundtrack in the background, and you've got the full Small Town Joy experience.
Entirely.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Carrie. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.